Okay, evening all on stream. Okay, hi Bert. Not many of us here. It's been rescheduled from yesterday. I had a club game yesterday and postponed it to today. I'm not sure how upsized it might have been, but we'll start anyway. So we're going to carry on the Alekhine versus Euwe match, which we were looking at last week on Tuesday. Let's carry on looking now at game 10. Okay, so in game 10, Alekhine was playing white and kicked off with d4. Okay, and Max overplayed knight f6. After c4, we see a Nimzo defense. Okay, so e6, and after knight c3, proper Nimzo Indian, bishop b4. Okay, and now we see the move queen c2. So queen c2, very popular move even today. So this was 1937, Alekhine playing queen c2. So maybe Kasparov was influenced a little bit by Alekhine in some opening choices. So queen c2, d5. We see c takes d, queen takes d5. e3, and black strikes at the center with c5 here. Okay, white collects the dark square bishop after a3. We see bishop takes c3, b takes c3. So white has strengthened the center here. And okay, is this bishop going to be useful on c1 later? Is it potentially going to occupy this diagonal, or will it be this diagonal? So we'll see. Knight c6, and we see knight f3, black castles, and then we see c4. Okay, so with c4, potentially these pawns are quite dangerous in the center. At the moment, black's got that locked in bishop. Will white be able to use this dark square bishop advantageously? We'll say bishop b2 soon. We see queen d6 and bishop b2 supporting that d4 pawn. Okay, and now black plays c takes d4, giving white hanging pawns, because after ed we have the hanging pawns here, which can be a major vulnerability, especially if they're made fixed later and black gets some key outpost squares. For example, if c5, black will get the d5 square. If d5, black's potentially getting access to some dark squares. And also this c pawn could be a liability along semi-open files as well, could be a liability for both pawns, potentially. For the moment, black plays now b6, so intending to put this bishop either here or potentially here. More likely to be here though, across that fine diagonal from black's perspective. We see bishop d3, bishop b7, indeed. White castles, rook ac8. So are these pawns kind of vulnerable, especially that c4 pawn? Pardon me, too much Diet Coke. So the rook is eyeing that queen, and the queen shifts out of that position, queen e2. Okay, so for the moment, are they that vulnerable, these two pawns here? Is there a maneuver like knight a5, for example, coming up? Or this dark square as well. This bishop being here is useful, but the f4 square has been neglected, and actually Max takes the opportunity to use that square with queen f4, which means actually if he wants to put frontal pressure on d4, you know, he's going to maybe put a lot more pressure on d4. Potentially white backs up that d4 pawn with rook ad1. We see rook fe8, which in some way looks a little bit strange, maybe you might think. Is it to prevent though d5? As if d5 we could take, and we're eyeing that queen. So it's preventive move, rook e8, maybe a bit of prophylaxis to play rook fe8 here. We see the move h3. Now knight a5, which strikes at c4 rather worryingly, and also threatens to give white horrible double pawns with bishop takes f3. Now this next move addresses both those issues. Knight e5, it protects c4, it gets out of the way of that bishop. Okay, but black now plays bishop e4. So what is black trying to do? Well, if he can get rid of white's bishop pair and lock down these not isolated pawns, these hanging pawns, then maybe black can grind out a win at some point in an endgame, for example. But I think white has other intentions here. Rook fe1, although he's losing the attacking bishop, it's not that bad here. Bishop takes d3, queen takes d3. Rook ed8. Okay, black looks to have a harmonious position. A lot of pressure on these hanging pawns, and tactically as well. There's some stuff going on now which is interesting. Is this queen a little bit of a target for gaining a tempo? This next move does gain a tempo. Bishop c1 on the queen. The queen goes to h4. Now we see queen e2. Okay, now here I think a little trap has been set. If rook d4, I think we just have g3, and there's a problem with that rook. I suspect there's a problem with that rook. So you can't really take on d4 here, I think, because of g3. Unless queen e4, there might be actually even simpler than g3. Pardon me, even simpler. Just knight f3 would fork queen and rook here. So say we did take, just to check this out. Pardon me. I think knight f3 might be the move, which makes that a poison pawn here, actually. If g3 is, as I just suggested, then I think there's just queen. No, there isn't queen e4. I think that's good as well. Okay, so scrap that. Rook takes d4. Okay. So okay, queen e2, rook d4. We've got knight f3 anyway. So let's move on. Rook e8 was played. Rather mysterious move. It looks a little bit on the passive side. Just the rook going back to e8, hiding away there. It does like defend e6. You might think knight f7 might be dangerous at some point. So e6 is supported. So what is white doing here? Now this next move is quite interesting. Alexander plays g4 in this position. I might think, what on earth is g4 here? What is this doing? I think there's some interesting variations which crop up if queen takes h3. For example, one idea might be rook d3, queen goes back here. Now possibly there's an initiative going on here with King G2. What year is this on Stream Chess Chief? It was 1937, the rematch, 1937, game 10. Okay, so in this position, well, King G2, might have the idea of rook h1 and rook h3. So this is getting quite tricky, maybe, for black. This position probably needs some technical analysis to determine exactly why g4 is a useful move. Looks a little bit on the flippant side. I don't know how many of you would consider g4 here. Okay, so black actually played knight c6 and not taking that h3 pawn, and that's now protected with king g2. And then we see knight takes e5, d takes e5, gaining a little bit of space there. And black's already in a desperate position. Where is this knight going? Can't go to t7. Was this a blunder by black? The knight hasn't got any squares. It goes to h5. what is going on here? Black's not really in the position, surely, for an attack. Sacrificing a piece like this, especially with this miserable rook on e8. It's only this rook which can really help any sort of attack via the c4 pawn. So the knight's taken. Okay, rook takes c4. Isn't white just the piece up? You might ask. Queen f3. What's the threat even? Rook f8 is played. Possibly, you know, f6 is on the cards to try and get some pressure, but black is a piece down. We see h6, which is very, very annoying now for black. Undermining black's king safety a little bit. f5, queen g3, you know, attacking g7 and the queen. Getting the queens off, basically. Queens come off, but white's still a piece up. So this has gone horribly wrong, it seems, for black. A piece down, it's difficult to justify it. Bishop e3, rook takes a3. Okay, there is potentially a distant possibility of these two connected passed pawns being handy to black. I think we're going to have to go back to the critical position because black does seem to be a piece down for not much. Rook d7 now has a plan that eventually the bishop, when it's unpinned, can go to, say, you know, it can go to h6, and this will be a menace. We see rook c4, king f2, check, rook e2, and one pair of rooks is coming off now, and black plays a5. Bishop supports the pawn, threatening now rook d8. That's a really dangerous pawn. That has to be stopped, rook d8. So rook c8 is played. And then we see rook a7, and here actually Max resigns. I think he feels the position is hopeless here. And it does look fairly hopeless. If the rook carries on moving, because if you move any of these pawns you lose them, but I think white can simply, for example, just play g4 at some point and bring the king up maybe to f6 is a simple plan. In fact, even without moving the pawn, white could just do this at minimum, rook f7 then rook f8, just winning, because that would be supported by the bishop. So here actually black resigned. But I think let's go back to the critical position here in this game. There was a very interesting position where if we just, okay, so it was a Nimzo Indian with queen c2, but let's go back to, in particular with the hanging pawns here, was this theoretically that good? I think there is some controversy from some analysis by Mikhail Botvinnik on this game actually, that this g4 move might not be all that it's cracked up to appear to be, like a brilliant move here, although rook e8 looks remarkably passive. This move g4, what do you guys think of it on stream? Do you like this g4 move? Do you think it's clever? So I wonder. I just think it's a little bit intriguing. You know, possibly it is, as I mentioned, just you know, the basic forcing move we would get. Well, you see, one problem is this knight, you know, for g5 is being threatened. Where is that going back? Because the knight's controlling d7 here. So if we kick this knight, where is it going? As in the game, that was a big problem. In any case, well, actually it can go to h5. So it's, sorry, pardon me. It's always got the h5 square. But is there another issue around this as well? For example, well, in the game, when we saw king g2, the threat was actually knight f3, just winning the queen in broad daylight. I think that's an issue here that happened. So the first thing to determine is I mean, this is not a move which might first come to mind. So let's just determine again, for the sake of argument, queen takes h3. Ah yes, I think that was in Botvinnik's notes. Very good, very good. Euwe on Play Chess. What if h6? What if h6? Okay. Preventing g5 and offering the square to the knight. Actually, you're right as well, because the queen would also be given an escape route back. So this might not be initially, might not be terrible, even if king g2 threatens to win the queen as well. That knight h7, you're right, might be a resource. Unless someone can see a refutation here. Well, this looks better than the game, because we're not losing a piece in this position. So I don't know, does anyone see a win here for white in this position with knight h7? It does look nice for white, but okay, yeah, I think that's a reasonable try. Okay, that might be better than the game continuation. I can't personally see any forced win here. Does anyone? If I give you 20 seconds, if anyone wants to see, how would you proceed as white here? If I give you 20 seconds, if anyone wants to throw a move which looks really good, I can't see it myself. I think the queen's been given an escape route back, the knight's been given a square. So there was an unfortunate accident with black losing a whole piece in the game continuation. So could it have been avoided? Gaga 12/4? Nope. Well, okay, I mean, I just can't see it. Yeah, I think that's a clever idea. h6, I don't know. Queen f3, then bishop d2. Ah, queen f3 is a forcing move, yeah, from Shiguru on stream. So on f7, okay, and then we try and protect f7, and if knight g5 we can just take that, I guess. Well, we can just take that knight, couldn't we, and then take on f7. So yeah, and embarrassing is f6. I think we've got knight g6 winning the queen. If rook e7, if rook e7, possibly, you know, c5 might be playable here, or even d5 looks a little bit on the dangerous side with this d pawn. Okay, so I think there's scope for investigating technically this game. Okay, so you would queen f6 maybe? Yeah, possibly. Yeah. So after queen f3, queen f6, you're saying instead of rook e7. Alright, so in the game, yeah, it was strange that you know, black maybe was shocked. I don't know, we need to yeah, I think check this game out more technically with engines at some point, maybe on the channel, some critical moments to be technically inspected. But in the game, you know, after knight h5, it seems black was in a desperate scenario here, a piece down. So okay, that was game 10. I don't think we should carry on there. White was just a piece up. I mean, yeah, so that's interesting to investigate what, you know, the real impact of g4 there. So let's go on to another game. The decisive game after that was in game 13. So in game 13, a bit of a grind, this one. Game 13. Max was playing white in game 13 and played d4, and we saw that Slav defense being repeated. D takes e4, that's bishop f5, e3, e6. It looks fairly modern to start off with, but now interestingly, from an evolution of style perspective, I think we don't normally, I suspect we don't normally see this next move, or rather should I say opening evolution. This next move looks a little bit on the risky side, that black played knight e4, Alexander Alekhine played knight e4. Is he kind of breaking, you know, a basic principle which we would observe, well, you know, as many of us would observe, you know, trying to get developed in castle early and not move a piece twice. And this is a great justification here, but it doesn't seem that convincing that white castles and Alekhine's next move is just bishop b4, as though he's just interested in grabbing some material. Or maybe, you know, his idea positionally is to prompt white just to give in and play knight takes e4 here. Bishop takes e4 and black would have a comfortable position. But Max has another idea in this position, and it turns out to be a very ingenious game. Max played bishop d3 here. Bishop d3, and now, you know, Alexander plays bishop takes c3, which seems a bit on the materialistic side. Bishop takes e4, okay, and the upshot is now that the opening position of black at move 11 seems a bit on the dodgy side, because again, moving another piece again, the same piece again, bishop b4, and structural damage now after bishop takes f5, e takes f5. Was this knight e4 already? It's seen to be a little bit on the controversial side. But even worse now, white plays a move which really wrecks black's structure even more. You know, like the modern semi-Slav defense with that triangle, it's been ripped apart. You know, this bit of the triangle has been ripped apart. We've got double pawns here, and that remnant of the triangle is now potentially victimized as well. I wonder if you can guess what Max Euwe played in this position, really destroying any resemblance of a modern semi-Slav game, really, early on. So this is just at move 13 now, in the 13th game, bit unlucky for some. So what did white play here? Can you guess? If I give you 20 seconds, and if you want to play chess, please hide the notation tab. It just okay. Yeah, the semi-Slav triangle is obliterated in this game because of d5. Already partially obliterated. And now what does d5 do? Well, it gives d4, but also it gains access to b5 potentially. After c takes d5, we see queen b5. This obliteration of the semi-Slav is in evidence here. And, you know, attacking this, attacking that, attacking this. What can black do? It's a treble attack. I've been talking about double attacks recently on YouTube. This is a treble attack. Structurally, you know, it's fascinating because, you know, I have several middle game books at home, well, a few, and often, you know, reference is made to Alexander Alekhine games, and when we see games like this and the kind of destruction of a solid opening, the semi-Slav defense with moves like knight e4, I personally wonder, really, Did this player really play like this? You know, Max is really embarrassing him with this position. And you might think, well, you know, it's only structure. You know, is there any dynamics here? Really, are there is there dynamic counterplay in this position for black? Well, Alexander plays Queen A5. Okay, so after Queen takes B7, if we did a structural audit of this position, isolated pawn, double pawns, isolated pawn, good use of D4. Okay, 2-1 here. I mean, structurally, you know, white's having a good time. Black does have a forcing move, rook B8. Okay, Queen C6. And he can't castle for the moment. That pesky knight is pinned. Queen C5. And then we see knight D4. Okay, and it starts to look nasty, because if you take the queen, then attacking rook and bishop is not very nice. Okay, so rook B6. Queen's come off. And white seems to be just better here. So you see that opening theory is so critical. And you know, if you looked at modern World Championship matches later on, you know, a lot of it is all theoretically prepared. You know, for example, I was looking at Kasparov-Anand's 1990 match, and when Kasparov struck back, it was all theoretical preparation. He used 1.5 minutes on his clock, so Anand's 1.5 hours. So how things have changed, that they did have to work hard from the very start of these games. And you also see these weird games where a lot of them are decided from these really dodgy openings. So why is this so bad for black, you might ask? Okay, well, A5. Now, if black just moves the rook back, we're going to lose F5 for nothing. That looks pretty nasty. So rook A6, and in black winning this A5 pawn, black's going to lose some quality of his position. He's going to get back a little bit of material, or if he gets back this pawn, rather wins that pawn, it's going to be at some cost. And this is proven by this next move, knight C2. Okay, now why can't black take with the rook? If black takes with the rook, I think white simply just takes on A5 and then plays B4, supported by that knight. I think that's just winning material. So unfortunately for Alexander, to win this A5 pawn, he's contorting his whole position, going into a self-pin. And I think this echoes a previous match. We had another disaster on A4 in I think the first match. This is kind of tactical disaster, this pin here, in its own right. And you might think, well, it's not a big deal, you know, knight B3 maybe at some point, possibly. The knight's actually protecting the rook at the moment, so maybe not. We'll see. B4 is played, and you might think this is surprising. Hold on a sec, the knight is protecting A6. It's a forcing move, but what we see now is bishop B2, which simultaneously threatens the bishop and also G7. Now, if you imagine G7 is lost and did another structural audit, there'll be isolated pawns everywhere. All of black's pawns would be reduced to isolated pawns. And in fact, this is what happens now, because black didn't want to go into this position, which looks very dodgy for nearly, well, if the bishop's hanging, G7's hanging, and A7's hanging here, what does black actually do in this position? It just looks very unfortunate. In fact, even more unfortunate, there's not too many squares for the bishop. You can't play A5 because just we just take, and then rook A8, winning the whole rook. So what do? Bishop D2 doesn't look too hot. Instead, you know, it just looks fantastic for white. So maybe, you know, Alexander he thought this was a lesser evil to play bishop A5, and we get this situation where, you know, this isn't what the semi-Slav player wants, this structure. Ronaman, you say Alexander may have been drunk when playing this game. I thought that was the first match, not this rematch. I know his pawn structure has been diced to bits. Look at the pawn structure. But, you know, structure is not everything in chess. Just because the pawn structure looks like this, you might think, you know, there's some G-file compensation coming up, or something to worry about on the G-file. Well, actually, you know, maybe there is. You know, rook G8, okay, bishop E5, knight B3, chasing away that rook and protecting A5. Now the rooks do double, so we do have some dynamic play against G2. And you might think, well, this isn't all bad, is it? Okay, bishop G3, bishop B6, and at least black's got away from this A-file pin, and he's actually protecting A7, and he might even dissolve one of his isolated pawns with D4, because these minor pieces are ready for that D4 to dissolve this isolated pawn, and then we're just left structurally with these pawns, which, you know, are they going to be that easy to pick up later? Well, actually, this is where Max, I think he excels in these sort of positions. He plays rook F4, so he's targeting F5, H5. Alexander's just letting that drop here. What does he actually do to defend F5 in this position? It's a bit unfortunate because, well, I believe it might be unfortunate because say rook G5, I think we might have H3. I'm just looking tactically, that rook G3 doesn't work necessarily because the knight's supporting E3 here. So if this drives the rook there, maybe that's in some way that's awkward, that's undesirable. But there might be other moves as well after this rook G5. But for some reason, well, this pawn was let go. H5 was played. No, it's immune here. Pardon me, it's immune here. If rook takes F5 was played, that would be justifying black's play H4, and then we're on G2. Okay, so we can't take on F5 here, but rook H4 now. Okay, and these pawns are still fundamentally targets. Black plays A5. Okay, why doesn't he protect H5? So next question, why didn't black protect H5 in this position? You know, maybe he likes the two rooks doubled like that, but they're against a very solid defense here. Maybe it's a little bit miserable in some other respects. He wants to get the A pawn going, maybe. Anyway, so A5 is played. Rook takes H5. Rook C6, which pushes the knight to an awkward position. And now this dissolving of one isolated pawn at least. E takes D4, knight takes D4, and it looks as though, well, at least some of the structure has been dissolved. Some of the bad structure has been removed. Check, though, and we have king safety creeping in a little bit. And black at the moment is now threatening, I think, a little cheapo in this position with knight E2 check. You know, because rook takes E2, we'd have rook C1. Otherwise, we might take on G3 and then take on F2 if the king went to H1. So this little cheapo is neutralized with king F1. I think that was designed against knight E2. We see rook C3, knight B1, rook C2. And again, you might think there's some tactics brewing against F2 here, rather menacingly. There's some focal point tactics around F2 emerging. Rook D1, pinning the knight, king C6, check, rook G6, rook H8. Now this pawn might be a target. King B7, rook F8 indeed. And here is black's position at a certain breaking point. Even though this knight seems to be doing nothing on holiday on B1, why is black's position in trouble potentially? Well, one thing is, in this position, is how on earth do we defend F7 here? Does anyone have an idea how to defend F7 in this position? If I give you 20 seconds starting from now. And I hope you've all seen my video on loose pieces and double attacks, which I think is an essential video actually to watch on my channel recently. Basically, if you are going to create a loose piece as part of your answer, then also try and factor in double attacks. So if you're going to create a loose piece, think about double attacks as a sort of punishment. This is a very interesting tactical safety idea. I'm not sure what black's best move here. I mean, this might be the point of this integration, really, because it's difficult to defend f7. Push f6, that's an interesting idea. f6, that's a way of defending the pawn, yes. Interesting. That wasn't played in the game. f6 is interesting. I wonder if there might be some forcing move, because f6 creates a weakness of the last move. It's not protecting b6, so I wonder if we played rook b8, we're almost dismantling black tactically with, say, rook takes b6. It doesn't quite work because we've always got rook c1 check here. Okay, so that doesn't quite work, but there's a principle that the rook is not protecting b6 in this position, which might be a slight side effect. In any case, how do we exploit that? Possibly better here is just knight a3, for example, hitting the rook, and this might start to be dangerous. The rook being disconnected from b6 does seem a worry in any case. So in the game, you know, we see Alexander playing an unfortunate move, rook g7, which is a loose piece, and there is a double attack available to white in the form of bishop e5, so double attacking g7 and d4. This is the game continuation now, Ryman, game continuation. Okay, so now a very clever move is played in response here. Black plays now knight f3. Okay, so if the rook is taken, then we have rook takes f2 mate. Isn't that sweet? Whoops, no place for the king, so we can't take that rook. Okay, and also equally bad is taking here, check, and we get mated like this. Okay, not too hot, but there is a resource available for white as well here. White plays check after king a7 check, and now we see that this is quite problematic, it seems, for black. Okay, so there's a question here. Black played in the game bishop c7. So question here, what if black played rook, if he played king a6, what would be a good move here for white? Actually, I don't think it's that hard to find a refutation now. So if I give you 20 seconds, what would you play here for white, starting from now? Yeah. Okay. Not giving you 20 seconds just yet. Okay. A few more seconds. I think black's got a lot of pieces hanging based on this rook f2, so eliminate the attacker with rook takes b6, I believe looks good, because then we can just take on g7. We're not getting mated or anything, and that should be good enough, shouldn't it? Shouldn't it? Mind you, we have check. Oh my word, we have knight g1 check. This cannot be serious. Well, the question here is, how is this knight coming out of G1? The bishop's handling B2, so why not just H4 here? Doesn't that just win for white anyway? Because this bishop is also on the docking square for the pawn. That would seem hopeless, wouldn't it, anyway? Even this continuation. Is there something stronger? Why not something else in this position if King A6 was played? Does anyone see anything stronger? That seems clear cut, that continuation. The knight's on D4. Any suggestions on? I think Rook B6 was clear cut. So in the game, oh, Rook A8 here. Oh, sorry. Yeah, of course. Check. Ow! Just wins the Rook. Very, very clear cut. Well done. Sorry, Shigeru on stream. That's end of game, clearly. That knight on B1 is not so lazy after all. Unbelievable. The knight on B1 here is pretty menacing. So basically in this position, I think we're starting to understand the reason that bishop C7 might have been played instead. Okay, and white now plays check, and we see king takes B8, rook takes C2, check, knight takes E5. This ending is better for white here after rook C5, double attacking the knight and the pawn. So this ending is now technically winning for white, and Max was able to he played H3 to stop knight G4s later. He played with good technique here to consolidate this position. Okay, check. Rook B3, swapping off the rooks, was a critical moment. So he's got this winning endgame position now. So how does he win this? G3 fixing these double pawns. H4 pushing the pass pawn. Okay, the knight is now coming to a good square eventually. It can do this at leisure. It's coming to a good square to attack F5 soon, and here Alexander resigned. So things were bad and grim from the opening, it seems, and the semi-Slav structure was made into a wreck. There was some resourceful dynamic play from black to compensate for that wrecked pawn structure along the G file. So credit to Max Euwe for keeping it all under control. Okay, so let's go on to another game. Should we do a quick review of this game before going on to another? Would anyone like to review the game again or not? Shall we just go on to the next game? No? Okay, we'll go on to the next game, shall we? Okay. So, yes, this might be the last game we look at in today's session. So, in tonight's session. So this was game 14. The very next game was a decisive game. Alexander playing white against Max. Sorry. Oh, yes. Review is always good. Okay, a couple of you have asked for a review. Sorry about the delay. Okay, all right. Just before we go on to the next game, we'll do a quick review of game 13. So how was that structure made, rubble, etc. Just replay that again. Game 13. Okay. So game 13. What we saw was, nowadays this is a very, very solid, reliable opening usually, but we saw this at the time. Maybe this was a theoretical nuance. Knight E4. But it seems it didn't really benefit black that much. This follow-up, bishop B4, we saw bishop D3, bishop takes C3, and in this position, bishop takes e4 was played. Bishop b4, and we saw bishop takes f5, and this very powerful d5. So black had a very uncomfortable position, I think, structurally here, and the white queen though is being harassed, so he is losing a little bit of time to get this structural advantage. Okay, and now this A file episode was interesting with b4. This idea of b4 and bishop b2 is a very neat idea. Okay, and now further fragmentation of black structure. So we end up with all these isolated pawns. But black has this dynamic G file and coordinates both rooks and puts the bishop on this diagonal, and it did start to look a little bit dangerous later, in fact, especially with d4 and other stuff. Okay, rook h4, and we saw a5, rook h5, we saw rook c6, knight a3, d4 dissolving one isolated pawn, rook e1 check, and then we saw this move king f1, which might have been against black playing knight e2, so no back row issue here. Rook c3, like driven back, rook c2, and it seems to be starting to be uncomfortable pressure on f2, and it didn't seem to work out for black. White is threatening this big threat of rook f8, trying to start mining this damaged pawn structure, and here we see this loose piece being a victim to a double attack, but a sort of counter move, tactical, very impressive counter move, knight f3 in this position, so seemingly justifying, you know, all the structural issues that black experienced for this dynamic position where both rooks are working fundamentally quite well, and all the pieces are converging, it seems, on white's king, but black has some king safety issues, as we saw, because after check here, rook d7, there's big problems, because if king a6 we have check, and then we have knight check here. Okay, so bishop c7, which forces a great ending to the game. After rook takes c7, king takes b8, rook takes c2 check, knight takes e5, rook c5, white forces a great ending position and was able to consolidate that. So that was the story of that game, quite fascinating, and the ending wasn't too hard to get the knight coming in to attack that f5. So okay, so we'll go on to the next game, so game 14 now. So in game 14, Alexander playing white plays d4, and we see knight f6, c4, e6, and actually we see Catalan Queen's Indian territory with g3 here being played. g3. Okay, d5, knight f3, looks like Catalan territory. D takes c4. So it just looks like Catalan territory. Check is played here, winning back the pawn. So white has usually a comfortable position from this. c5, bishop g2. The queen is subject to a little bit of harassment. Goes back to d3 here. C takes d4. White's content to lose this d4 pawn for the moment. Just plays castle, and now regains it with knight takes d4. Black castles, knight c3, and you know, black in the Catalan here has some problems with the queen side, and this bishop looks quite good. Black plays e5, at least liberating the bishop, but kind of weakening d5 a bit, and also of course the f5 square is weakened, and that is used here with knight f5. So here, if queen takes d3, we have knight takes e7 check, so that's not possible. Bishop b4, queen c2. Black now takes on c3, incurring some structural damage on white, while this queen has to hold on to f5 here, so he has to take with a pawn, otherwise he's losing f5. Bishop takes f5, queen takes f5. So out of the opening here, white has the bishop pair. Structurally, we have black's got a slightly better structure, and you might think prospects on c3 at some point. But okay, let's see what happens. Queen c7, and dynamic play now from Alexander. How many of us would be tempted? Well, we can't really defend this, can we? This is a measly pawn to try and defend in this position. So can you guess Alexander Alekhine's next move here if I give you 20 seconds starting from now? Anyone? Can anyone guess what would you play here to try and keep your prospects alive? Yeah, bishop h6. Wow. Just undermines f6. It threatens immediately bishop takes g7 actually for queen g5 and taking on f6. What a move. He's not lying down to die here with the c3 pawn. He's going for the king like he did in the previous game. You know, Alexander's got the fighting spirit. He's going to go for the king, but this is a better position than the previous game to go for the king. Structurally, he's not being compromised too badly. He's got real assets here to work with. The bishop pair. This is going to be a better kingside assault than the previous game, surely. You know, what can black do in this position? It's tricky. You know, as I say, queen c3, we might have bishop g7 here as the strongest move, because if we went queen g5, then maybe black can just play knight e8. But if we play bishop g7, then we're really gaining access to black's king. Thank you very much. That's pretty dangerous. Okay, so after this bishop h6, knight bd7 holds the f6 knight. We see queen g5, forcing a knight retreat. Now rook ab1, and all of a sudden, well, you know, the queen can't take at the moment because of b7, surely not. Knight c5 holding up b7. Okay. Now we see the move queen g4. And you might think, what on earth is the move queen g4 about? Maybe you didn't. Queen g4, for example, means, for example, if f5 we've got access to queen c4 check, as one example. Let's look at the game continuation as well. Rook d8. And the other point about queen g4, it does make a space for the bishop. Thank you very much, first TGB warrior. Yeah, bishop g5. Now, the queen was vacating g5 for the bishop to come back there. But my other point is still valid here, that if we play f6, we have got that genuine queen c4 check might actually be genuinely useful in this position. Okay, so it's you know, both properties okay, of that move, queen g4, rook d6, and the queen does actually come to c4 anyway. Okay, pinning that knight, kind of b6. Okay, now with the bishop on g5, you might think this is almost trappable, but mind you, with this f7 pawn pinned, this next move is interesting. f4. So without f6 at black's disposal, white's threatening f takes, and h6 is not going to trap the bishop because we've got f takes and we give space to our bishop to go back. We see rook g6, rook bd1, which makes way for bishop d8 to be an escape resource here for the bishop attacking the queen. We see e4, and curiously, you might think this is curious, white plays bishop h4 here. What on earth is the idea of this? You might wonder. Bishop h4. Well, it does mean, for example, that f5 without losing the bishop is now possible, attacking the rook, for example. It does support g3, but it keeps an eye on d8 still. Okay, we see b5. Offering a pawn here. Why is this pawn in some way poisoned? Alexander didn't take the pawn. He played actually queen b4. So if we take this pawn, what would have happened? Does anyone know? If I give you 20 seconds starting from now, what would you play as black in this position? Anyone? There's some suggestions for knight d6, right? I'm not entirely convinced, but mind you, it does mean knight f5 is on the cards, which would embarrass the bishop. So possibly, actually, yeah. Now I'm more convinced looking at knight f5. So where do we move this queen? I'll give you an example square. Okay, knight f5, and that looks as though, hang on, this bishop is really dumb on h4 now. And not only that, black seems to be threatening knight e3 as well. Okay, so b5, clever move. It's well, we see queen b4, a5, and again the queen doesn't take on b5. We see queen a3. Now we see f5, and the bishop decides to get out of this h4 square. It goes bishop d8, seemingly skewering queen against this pawn. Queen a7, which threatens this kind of discovered check here. The king gets out of the way, and now the pawn's protected with rook a6. So what a strange turn of events of this game. Rook d5, and this diagonal might be useful to white. He is eyeing that rook. Okay, knight e6, rook fd1, and the knight takes on d8, and after rook takes d8, look at this. This looks useful, doesn't it? Queen f7, rook 1 d5, rook c6. Okay, what's going on after rook c6? Why can't white just take this pawn? He does. Queen c4, as though c3 is going to drop off. But Alexander has a nice move in this particular position. Can you guess what he plays if I give you 20 seconds starting from now? Anyone? Forcing move. There's a tactical vulnerability to be sniffed with forcing moves. Rook takes f5. Yeah, because the rook is responsible for this knight. Whoopsie daisy. And he's threatening queen takes f8, mate in 1. Oh dear. That has to be parried. Rook cf6. White takes. Miserable g takes f6 has to be played. So white's laughing here. Rook d4. Queen takes e4. And now it's white forcing a nice ending. Check. And he takes on e4. Oh dear. This is a terrible ending inflicted on black. It's a lost ending being inflicted on black now. On Max. Over. What a ridiculous series of events in this game. Queen d2, queen b1. The queen's going to come to e1 soon. It gives up c3 to get the queen to e1. Forcing off the queen surely because we've got this battery on here, which is a bit worrying. Say the queen, does the queen really want to go back? It looks miserable. It looks like a miserable position 2 pawns down. So let's just carry on with the game continuation. Queen takes e1. And it's technique here, isn't it? Because really, sorry, not 2 pawns down, but it's a pawn down. But this bishop's very, very nice compared to the knight. Potentially, knight d6, bishop c6. Rook b8, rook e6. Check. Check. Knight f5, losing. Okay, now he's losing that pawn. 2 pawns down. Knight e7. Now, although he's losing a2, it turns out that h7 is vulnerable. Bishop e4, threatening, for example, rook f7 if rook a2, which would double attack h7, and actually there might even be stronger here in this position. Let's have a quick look at that. In the game, king g7 was played, but say we did play rook takes a2. Stronger than rook f7 might actually be rook h6. Does everyone agree? We want to play rook h6 here to guarantee winning a pawn. Because if we played rook f7, then surely black has knight g6. Does everyone agree with that? If I give you a few seconds here. I believe that's the case. Yeah, because we wouldn't have knight g6 because I think we just take here. And we're going to lose that pawn. King g6. We're just going to win that pawn anyway. And we're going to go to a7 here, and these pawns are going to be pushed forward. So it's a dire ending. Black played king g7, rook e6. And king f7, rook h6. He's winning that pawn. That h7 for a2. King f6, check. And after rook a6, actually, Max decided he's had enough of this game. You might think there's still some play left or something. But it's tricky for black. I think white's plan might be just to march these pawns, and this king is going to be okay here if the pawn comes down. This is a technique winning position. So Max actually resigned after rook a6. The bishop actually dominates that knight here. Look how the knight's been dominated by the bishop. and the pawns are looking pretty bad. Once you get a pawn to g6 and then play f5, you've also then got f6, and this pawn is being supported by the bishop, so it's pretty nasty. Okay, so I hope you got something from this week. I think we'll stop there. Okay, I'll put it on YouTube. Comments or questions on YouTube when it gets uploaded. Okay, thanks very much. See you next week on Tuesday at the normal time, Tuesday. Thanks very much.